Queens, from the Bronx and Queens, New York's 14th congressional district, the most impacted district in America, calling people, losing their families every day. It is a joke when Republicans say that they have urgency around this bill. The only folks that they have urgency around are folks like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse and Shake Shack. Those are the people getting assistance in this bill. You are not trying to fix this bill for mom and pops, and we have to fight to fund hospitals, fighting to fund testing. That is what we're fighting for in this bill. It is unconscionable. If you had urgency, you would legislate like rent was due on May 1st and make sure that we include rent and mortgage relief for our constituents.
Here's the thing, though. Every last Democrat, with the exception of AOC, voted for this bill. Yes, every last Democrat in the House, with the exception of AOC, voted for this bill. The Senate passed this bill. Donald Trump is going to sign this bill, and the House of Representatives last night passed $480 billion. AOC is right. The thing that the Democratic Party ended up winning, if you can call it winning at all, was basically to get more testing. Think about that for the moment. Republicans want to open the economy, and in order to do that, you will need to dramatically increase the amount of testing. And it took the Democratic Party to argue for testing. Think of the position that you're in if you are taking a position for something that should just be understood as required, and that you end up having to fight for that. AOC was not necessarily in on what was going on. I have a hypothesis to what I think is taking place and why the Democratic Party is so exorbitantly weak right now. I think there are potentially 3 items associated with it, and I think it makes sense from the standpoint of policy, even though it's pretty cynical in regards to what it means for this policy to be implemented. That said, Politico did make the point that the Democratic Party is going to use the economy in order to attack Trump. That is potentially one of the weakest and lamest attacks that you can make, and I am greatly doubtful that that particular attack would even work or has legs. I would explain what I mean by that. But basically, AOC was pissed off, and her basic argument was this bill doesn't attend to the needs of the population at all. And in not attending to the needs of the population, we're talking specifically about her constituency. The Democratic Party basically agreed to a deal that did nothing for workers, nothing for people who are just poor, nothing for the people who basically have lost their jobs and their health care, did nothing for the health care costs, did nothing to push off bills and mortgages. None of that stuff was brought into this particular bill. And Mitch McConnell has already said, yeah, nothing else. If anything, Mitch McConnell even went further, saying we need to start dealing with the debt. We need to start dealing with the debt. Meaning, you've given Republicans everything they wanted. And now you have a situation where the public actually greatly needs relief. You gave $1,200 to the public, and acting as if that in and of itself was enough for the public to somehow make it from point A to point B. Let's put this in perspective for the moment. 2/3 of the Hispanic community is out of a job. 43% or out of a job or lost wages. 43% of the population is either out of a job or lost wages. More than half of Los Angeles is out of a job. 22% of Michigan is out of a job. 26 million people have filed for unemployment. 10 million people have lost their health care. Both of those numbers are just going to continue to dramatically go up. Nearly 1 million people have died. Nearly 1 million people have been affected. You have 50,000 people that have died. We are the epicenter of this particular virus at this point. This is where we are. And to put that further in perspective, before any of this had taken place, you already had millions who didn't have health insurance. You already had people, the majority of which living paycheck to paycheck and not having at least $500 in the bank for an emergency. Meaning you had a population that was vulnerable on the day that this particular virus took hold. And within the course of a month or a month and a week, 26 million people lost their jobs. They're expecting this number to go to 25 or 30% by summer, meaning it's not going anywhere anytime soon, at least not within the next month. Her basic point is, if we are not going to attend to the needs of the population, then why on earth am I going to get on board and vote for this particular bill? It's inadequate to deal with what we actually need to be dealing with right now, nor am I going to give it my tacit approval by giving this a yay vote. Well, all of our other Democratic colleagues voted yay on this, And like I said, the real concerns, the real needs of the population, for the most part, have gotten ignored in order to dump money into a small business account. I want to explain why I think the Democratic Party is being this ineffectual on this policy. I don't necessarily think it's entirely happenstance. I actually think to some degree there may be a certain degree of intentionality behind the policy that they're taking to coordinate themselves to some degree with Trump's policy in order to take political advantage. Yes, this is cynical, but tell me if it's not necessarily true. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, so I thank you for the opportunity to allow me to do it. To give a sane, rational response. You're in the middle of a pandemic. You have nearly 1 million people infected. You need to keep the number down because you don't want your hospitals overwhelmed. You had a society that was already vulnerable before this particular pandemic hit. And the society that was vulnerable has now been pushed to the strait of desperation. You have California to have these modern day bread lines that are going back for blocks. You have food banks that are opening up all around the United States with many people, elderly, not able to get out because they don't necessarily want to risk their lives to do so. I'm trying to give you the notion of what the country is living in right now. In order, if your highest priority is keeping down the number of people who get infected by the illness, then you need to eliminate all of the incentives that are built into our process that pushes those people to either need to get back to work or want to get back to work. Unless you deal with those, then ultimately those people are going to be compelled based on their needs alone and their own ideology or limited ideology and understanding what the government can do, what the government should be doing in this particular pandemic in order to provide for the general welfare. Well, let's go first to the rational response before we get to the response that the parties have been engaged in.
Are aware that in my own state of Vermont, throughout this country, there are families that literally do not have food in the cupboards. They are wondering how they're going to feed their kids tomorrow. Tens of millions of Americans have lost their jobs, and they're not quite sure how they're going to pay their rent, pay their mortgages, pay their student debt loans, pay their credit card debts. And we are now working on a new piece of legislation that I hope will address many of the issues that low-income and working families have.
But see, that's just it, right? Low-income and working families were effectively pushed to the very end of the process where now the Republican Party is like, yeah, we're done. We don't have anything else that we need to really do. All of the leverage in the process is gone, especially if Republicans were serious about getting the small business part done. Here's the catch. The House of Representatives is owned by Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party can do whatever they want to create competing pieces of legislation to go against whatever the Republicans are pushing in the Senate. Meaning, as the Democrats are negotiating in the Senate, the House of Representatives can be pushing out their own bit of legislation in order to have this political, ideological fight over competing visions in the middle of a pandemic. But again, that is noticeably absent. And my thing is, why is that noticeably absent? I mean, after all, if you were trying to win this race, you look like you would go to the left in the middle of a pandemic and try to knock it out of the park. This is your moonshot. This gives you all the reason in the world to push for certain policies. But again, that is not what's happening. Even going to the notion of pragmatic or pragmatism in regards to the policy, well, you just end up with Sanders said. We need to keep down the number of people who get infected, meaning we need to ensure that those people don't leave the house. But the government didn't do that. The government did everything for corporations, for small business, while throwing pennies at the population. Whatever else of a reason that the Democratic Party has been this weak on this issue, part of it has to do with the notion of there's been no accountability for so long in the political process that they very well may believe that there won't be consequences for them to not act. And not just not act, they may even be so out of practice in regards to doing big things, especially in the context of a crisis of this scale, that they may not even know what to do. So I hope you understand what I mean. It's screwy on 2 points. in the point of there's been no accountability for the last 40, 50 years. So why would there be accountability now, especially since Trump is in office and you can point to Trump and blame him for the issues that take place in the country, meaning using using the anger and the pain within the context of a population as for political expedience in lieu of actually having a real ideological or policy-based framework to deal with a crisis. The second reason could have something to do with political pressure, meaning there could be a certain amount of political pressure that's being exerted on the people who decide that they don't want to acquiesce to this. Meaning, in a situation where you have a crisis and you have an economic crisis where the society hits the skids, well, can you turn around and basically say, I am not going to back X, or I'm not going to back Y, or I'm not going to spend money for X or Y? Maybe, but you can also have certain political attacks aimed at you for doing that with a population that really only hears every eighth word that is being said on a particular topic. I hope you understand what I mean. It's possible that it opens them for susceptibility to attack in order to try to push back and hold on this kind of line of, no, this is not going to be a race to the bottom. We need and expect certain things for the various workers in the population. The last item that I definitely give more credence to has to do with exploiting a political advantage. So Politico, in the article that I was reading earlier today, made the point that the Democratic Party is basically going to use the economic concerns and the economic chaos that is basically being created from the coronavirus as an attack point to Trump. This is massively weak as an attack. Now, again, I've given all the numbers on how bad things are, so don't misunderstand me. There's a lot of pain in the country, and there are a lot of people who are terrified, scared, who aren't necessarily getting the wages that they would typically get, who don't necessarily have that. There are people with great and pressing concerns. So that part's true. Donald Trump is working behind the scenes in order to try to get those people back to work. Now, the catch becomes, does the Democratic Party have a divergent policy from trying to get those people back to work? And if so, why do they have that versus not? Meaning they're not taking a policy prescription for this. They're basically just piggybacking on to whatever the Republican Party is pushing on to. My question becomes, why? Why? Why aren't you pushing for your own particular policy? And then I realized that it's very possible that they're not pushing for their own policy because basically the people who are funding them and paying the Republican Party is the owner class and the managerial class, which is basically the same people who are paying the Democratic Party. Meaning the Democratic Party is a party that runs off cash just like the Republican Party. And in running off cash just like the Republican Party, the owner and the managerial class at this point will be least likely to be the class that will be forced to go back into areas where they're going to put their own lives on the line. Who will get put on the line is their workers, in which case their profit motive runs up against the health and well-being of the nation. And I can tell you what is going to win out, their profit motive. Meaning the people who are pushing Trump and who are also most likely pushing Democrats is basically the owner class. And they want to get this economy up and running. The catch here is, if you can take a policy where you can blame Trump for the economy, and again, Politico already made the point that the Democratic Party is going to basically blame Trump. It means that the incentives for the Democratic Party is basically to not do anything to deal with the pressing pain and concerns of the nation and to keep the economy closed. Now, yes, you keep the economy closed because it's in your best medical interest, but it also just so happens to be in their political interests, especially if they're going to use economic hardship as a way of attacking Trump. Meaning if a Democrat was in office, the Democrat would have the economy closed also. By the same token, they would use the pain from the economy being closed as an attack point to hit Trump with regardless. Again, this hinges on not doing anything real because pain at this point is part of your political weapon, or that's one of your political weapons in your toolbox. Yes, it's pretty cynical. By the same token, can you tell me that the Democratic Party is not paid by the same managerial and owner class that effectively backs the Republican Party? And what is the interest of that class? And do the interests of that particular class typically gets expressed in a political space as opposed to what the poor or lefties or African Americans or Hispanics or what any other group of poor people want? I think the answer somewhat answers itself. The last point to this is they would rather lose to Trump than give concessions. The best way to actually go against Trump in this race is basically to come up with an ideological framework to show how ineffective he is in comparison to how competent you are at dealing with the crisis, and increase the numbers with this notion of you're the people, you're the adults in the room, and that Donald Trump is incompetent and a clown. Unfortunately, because the Democratic Party hasn't done that, when people look at the two parties or look at Republicans or Trump and Biden, it's a wash. They give it 50-50 because they haven't necessarily held any real opposition to Republicans. But again, my contention is that the reason they haven't had any real arguments for the Republicans in this case or coming up with a competing point of view is because the same class that pays Republicans is the same class that pays them. The interests are the same. And if you can blame Trump for something when your interests are aligned, especially if it's a position that you can't credibly take because the public will essentially eat you alive for it, that's just good politics, right? Cynical, sadistic, heartless, unempathetic. But by the same token, if your point is to win and everything else matters less, then you may actually take that pathway. Here's the catch and the reason why that doesn't work, though. Under normal circumstances, a bad economy is enough for a president to lose. The problem here is that the parties or the public doesn't see this as Trump's fault. They may consider Trump to be incompetent. They may consider the loss of life to be Trump's fault. They may even consider the people who get infected or the high infection rate as being a factor of Trump's fault, meaning not responding too slowly. They may even consider Trump a liar. But when it comes to the economy, they consider Trump to be a better choice than Biden or the Democratic Party. And because they consider it to be a better choice, it means that despite 26 million jobs being lost, the public doesn't view it as Donald Trump's fault. They view it as an issue of the COVID-19 virus. And they make a distinction between Trump, in this case, versus the virus. Which means that if you can use this as an attack point and the public doesn't necessarily entirely blame Trump for it, then you've somewhat shot yourself in the foot right off the bat in trying to get the public to believe something that the public currently just doesn't necessarily believe. Further into this point, not making a concession to the left. Because honestly, if you really wanted to win this, your goal would be to consolidate the left with the rest of the party by giving over political concessions. It is clear that instead of the Democratic Party giving over Medicare for all or expansion of student loans and college, free college, instead of them giving over those political concessions for things that are popular all throughout the society itself, especially in the Democratic Party, they would prefer to lose to Trump. They don't want to give concessions. They want to be able to win this, just like they've been able to operate over the last 40, 50 years, to basically win without giving anything over in regards to concessions under the idea that the left has nowhere else to go. The left has been doing this for 40, 50 years, so we don't have to do anything else. Now, the catch here is that despite the reason they don't want to give concessions is because they don't want to set the precedent of the left winning. If Biden has gone around saying Medicare for all wasn't going to work, and then he has to knuckle under and take political concessions of Medicare for all, that makes him look that much more like a liar over the past year. It creates a difficulty for him to do that, even though if you were trying to get elected and you were trying to create energy around your campaign, that would literally be the thing to do in order to create that energy around the campaign and give you the best option of winning. This path is taken because they don't necessarily want to give those concessions, and in not necessarily wanting to give those concessions, they're trying to find another avenue, another pathway by which to attack Trump and kind of organize a political campaign and get him around. That's how sad this is. They are perfectly willing. The question that people need to ask is, why is the Democratic Party so willing to lose to Trump, a person who they said was putting toddlers in cages and concentration camps? But they're willing to lose to Trump as opposed to making political concessions that are popular from the standpoint of the nation and popular from the standpoint of the party. Why does losing to Trump matter that much more to them than doing something that is in the interest of the public, especially considering we're in the middle of a pandemic? I'll leave this here. Like, share, and subscribe. Let's see. Burning a guillotine. Yes, I've seen I've seen the video, but I haven't listened to it. It's in my chat, or it's in my Twitter feed. Old Gringo. The emperor has no clothes and Annie got no panties. I just wanted to say that. Fair enough, old gringo. Fair enough. Bernard Guillotine. What are you describing? The two Santa Claus theory. The two Santa Claus theory? I don't know what the two Santa Claus theory is. All right, I'll end this here. Like, share, subscribe. I didn't want this one to go too long. 20 minutes. It's fine. Thanks all.